So Janae, thank you so much for, considering me as one of the podcasts that you wanted to come on and talk about your awesome book with. So thank you for, keeping me in mind. I appreciate that.
Oh, thank you for having me. I've been following as your journey, and I love the way you conduct your interviews. And especially on TikTok, I watched your storytelling style, and I liked it a lot. So I was really excited. And that's, I think we need more people sharing a positive message, and because there's just a lot of negativity out there, and those are the ones with like the huge following, and they're influencing people maybe in the wrong direction. So it's good. I hope you gain a bigger audience, and I'm actually very sure you're going to.
So Janae, what I want to talk to you about though is your Perfectly Flawed book, A Veteran's Journey from Homeless to Hero. Love the title.
Thank you.
I love the title. And hero is my favorite word, and that's in there too. But I wanted to talk to you all about this book. So you just, kick this thing off, and your marketing skills are on point, by the way.
Thank you.
I feel like I'm there every step of the way with you, on your progress. And I love that. And you did like a little PR tour with all these podcasts and all these interviews. And actually, Janae, let me take a step back. I need to do the Hero's Gauntlet with you first. First question: who is your favorite TikToker?
Oh, my favorite TikToker. Well, it's gonna be Matt's All Right. So Matt Jimenez, and that's because I've watched Matt. I don't know if you follow him, but he talks a lot about PTSD, mental health, and I've known Matt. I think even before he got on TikTok, and just watching how he came on TikTok and he does his storytelling. It's very compelling, but it's also linked with humor. So he has a really good way of telling stories. And I always knew he was going to hit it big, but he's doing really well. I think he has well over 1 million followers now on TikTok.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay, I wrote the name down. I will look him up because that
you're
sounds
gonna
like.
Love him.
Okay, thank you for recommending that. Okay, so you just wrote Perfectly Flawed. So on the topic of books, what book would you recommend?
On the topic of books, there's so many good ones, but I think one of my favorite books is Leaders Eat Last. Actually, no, I'm going to go back to Turn the Ship Around because it's written by a Navy commander. And I love Turn the Ship Around because it talks about intent-based leadership. And so a lot of times, especially in the military, you kind of get that draconian style leadership where you have to ask for permission to make decisions. But what he learned was that you were kind of taking away people's abilities to take risks and their confidence to make decisions and to grow and to become leaders themselves. And so Turn the Ship Around, it's a commander of a submarine out of Pearl Harbor. And he just talks about giving the decision making back to your subordinates. And they come to you and they say, look, this is what I'm going to do, but here's all of the risks that I've considered. And, yes, there may be risks to this decision, but the risks don't outweigh the benefits of this decision. And so I just really thought that was a great leadership book for those who are looking to kind of change the culture of their work center. David Marquette, he's a Navy commander, retired Navy commander.
I'll definitely check that out. Okay, question number 3. What is your spirit animal?
Oh, spirit animal. I feel like it's got to be a bird. I don't know why I'm obsessed with birds. And there was a song when I was younger that I used to listen to that kind of helped me through hardship, but it talks about, just being able to fly and learning to fly with a broken wing. Do you remember that song? I think might be Reba McEntire, but it's like with a broken wing. She follows her dreams, or she carries her dreams. And so I just feel like through life, like every time I kind of go through hardship or anything happens, I just want to kind of soar through, with a broken wing.
Right.
So I think it would definitely be a bird. I love birds.
I love that. My wife's obsessed with birds too. She's got binoculars. She's always like peeping them out in the backyard.
We can totally be besties.
I think you really would. And she loves fashion too. She was a fashion major at one point, so you guys really would probably get along. Okay, so bonus question. This is the last question before we talk about your book. What was your proudest Navy moment?
My proudest Navy moment would be there was when we deployed right after 9/11. So I'm aging myself now.
I'm
So
37, so I'm right around there.
okay, so you were around at that time, a little bit younger than me. But so yeah, right after 9/11, we deployed and we didn't have time to replenish the ship. So I'm in supply. We didn't have time to replenish the ship before we left. And so we did what's called replenishments at sea. And in order for us to send our trash or our mail or anything that we wanted to send off the ship, we had to have a pallet that would sit in the middle of the flight deck. And then the helicopter would hover over us, and you hold the stanchion and you got to kind of connect the stanchion into the helicopter while it's hovering. And so it can only be one
Wow.
person that's standing there. You got to hold this huge stanchion above your head and just balance it. And you got to snap it in really quickly. And aircraft, that a helicopter can't hover for too long over a flight deck and people. It's dangerous. And so it's something that you have to do very quickly. So we were conducting the vertical replenishments at sea, and they wouldn't let any of the women on the team to do that specific function. So I was allowed to drive the forklift on the flight deck and use the pallet jack on the flight deck, but I wasn't allowed to be the one to hook the stanchion because they felt like I was too skinny. I would get blown away. I didn't have the arm strength, so I wouldn't be able to snap it in quick enough to the helicopter. And so I really wanted to try this, though. I was adventurous. I was young. I was 19 years old. And I was like, I really want to try. The chief wasn't watching, and the NCO was like, you know what? Go ahead and give it a try. I'm going to let you try this one time. So I was like, all right, I'm going to get out there. So I braced myself up against the pallets. And I'm like, I got one shot to prove that women can do this, because if I
And that's a lot of pressure.
It really was, because everybody's just waiting to say, like, to laugh or to say, see, we told you, you couldn't do it. And so I was like, no, I got to do this. I'm going to have to. So I stand there and the helicopter hovers, and just using that coordination, I just snap it right in and run right out from under the helicopter with no fear. And it was faster than any of my male shipmates had done. And so after that, I ended up being on the team as a regular. And for the next deployment, I was actually the lead of the team. So I was the one making the decisions of who got to go and perform that. It was something fun for us. It was scary and dangerous, but it was adrenaline, right? So after that, yeah, I ended up actually being the lead for that and the one who was making the decisions. So, and of course, the team was more integrated at that point. So that was my favorite memory. And I really had fun with it. And I felt like I was part of paving the way for change in the Navy.
No, you absolutely did. You broke through that glass ceiling. You saw your opportunity. You had a lot of pressure on you. It was more than just a job at that point, right? There's like, you got guys like mocking you from the side, like, watch this. You got girls like, oh my God, I hope she does this. You probably had girls cheering you on, and then you do it and it changes everything. And then you like ran the program. I mean, that's amazing.
It was a really, really, really special moment. And I think it helped in the future for me to kind of not have fear to take those risks. And so after I transitioned out of the military, jobs that I would apply for, I read a book by Sheryl Sandberg, and she talks about lean in and how a lot of women want to wait until they feel like they're fully competent to be able to apply for a job, right? So men will apply for jobs that they think they can learn, that they think they can eventually do, typically. But women, we often hold ourselves back, and we want to wait until we know that we're 100% qualified, and then we'll apply. But I think that risk that I took back then, we wouldn't have known if I could perform that task or not had I not tried. And so I think having taken that risk and it being successful lended to me, after I transitioned out of the military, applying for jobs that I knew that I could learn over time, instead of waiting until I felt like I was 100% qualified or above my peers to be able to apply for that. So I think it changed my mindset a little bit as well.
Like you take risk taking and turn it into a superpower. That's kind of what I've seen from you, kind of researching your book, and risk taking is one of your superpowers. And I think that's awesome. And in the military, that goes a long way, because not many people do that. They're kind of conditioned not to.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
All right, Janae, Perfectly Flawed, a veteran's journey from homeless to hero. It's hard to picture you homeless. Like you have all these really fancy clothes. You're hilarious on TikTok. You're super successful. You have an adorable husband. I saw him on the Drew Barrymore show.
He
Adorable
was the
guy.
star of the show.
Yeah.
I got back and I was like, did you guys watch? And everybody was like, we saw Chiago. And I was like, he was definitely, because he's never in front of the camera. And so people were like, we finally get to see him. So
It's hard for me to picture you as like some struggling, kid on the street with nothing, seeing you now. And I know that's in the book. And I was hoping you can just kind of run us through, what that looked like for you. How did you get to that point?
And I'm glad that you mentioned it in the way that you did, because that's actually where the term perfectly flawed came from. As I've like elevated through life, I think people assume that I had a hand up in life and that, everything was handed to me. And so perfectly flawed is really my way of saying, look, I'm not perfect. I have this past that has really helped me to get to where I am today. So I come from a long line of dysfunction, family dysfunction from both sides of my family, and childhood abuse. And when I was 16 years old, after a very tragic event, which is in the book, I'll save that part for when you guys read the book. But after a very tragic event happened, my mom dropped me off at a homeless shelter in Hollywood. And for the rest of my teenage years, I really lived going from shelter to shelter, as well as, just working to avoid being trafficked into, human trafficking, drug trafficking, attempts to try and kidnap me and harm me, just trying to kind of avoid those and survive. And as I started to turn 18, like I was going to school, I was working, I was really trying to change my story. I knew this wasn't the place for me. And even when I was living in Hollywood, I was working at clothing stores. And so even some of the homeless people that were there thought that I wasn't homeless. And so they would ask me for money. And I'm like, I'm homeless just like you. But because I worked in clothing stores, I got some of their clothes. That helped a little. But none of the jobs that I worked were going to be able to help me pull myself out of the situation that I was in. And there was kind of a systemic barrier to me being able to break out of that situation. I had to work, and because I had to work, I couldn't go to school. And because I couldn't go to school, I wasn't getting my diploma. And I apologize for that. I wasn't getting my diploma, and I wasn't being able to get some of the jobs that would be able to pay for me to pull myself out of survival mode. So at 18 years old, while I was living in an adult homeless shelter, one of my girlfriends joined the Navy, and she invited me to lunch with a recruiter. And all it took was a Carl's Jr. cheeseburger, and I was sold.
Dang, it happened that fast, huh?
I was like, free food. I think there were times when, and you'll read about it in the book, there were times where I was surviving off of ketchup packets. There was nowhere for me to get food, and I didn't have money. And so I would just go get the free ketchup packets out of Popeyes and eat those to just kind of hold me over until one of the shelters had a serving available.
Wow. Were these shelters like all sorts of different people of all different ages, or is it for children, or like what kind of shelter are we talking here?
You're the first one to ask about that, and I really appreciate that you asked about it, because I really like to talk about that age group. So I lived in their at-risk youth shelters, and so youth shelters are typically age 14 to 18 years old, and so that's the transition age for youth. And so what they're doing is they're trying to teach you how to go from, you're no longer a child, but you're also not an adult. And so you're in that age where they're trying to teach you survival skills so that you can then transition into an adult who, that can take care of themselves. So the first shelter I lived in was a night shelter. And it was, so at night, you show up at the door with your backpack on at 7:00 at night, you wait in line. If they have a space available, you can sleep there. If they don't have a space available, you don't have anywhere to sleep. And in the morning, you pack up your bags and you go back, and they have like day shelters where you can kind of go during the day to get their drop-in shelters. Miley Cyrus actually made one of them famous, one that I attended frequently. It was called My Friend's Place. And so that was one of the day shelters where we would go. You could get lunch, you could get counseling, help with filling out applications, computer access. So there were some day shelters where we could go and just be safe throughout the day. After a few months of being on the streets and being in the more of like the rough of it, I was accepted into a what's called a transitional living home. And so it's kind of similar to like a group home. And so this one is a little bit more rehabilitative. And you go through a process of being rehabilitated, and then you get sent to independent living classes, and you have to have a job or do community service. So they kind of start to just build you up to where you will be able to be confident to stand on your own after you age out of that shelter. So those shelters age out at 18, and then after 18 you have shelters that go up to about 24 years old.
Oh, wow.
And so, yes. And so then I was moved over to like an adult shelter. It's called Covenant House. And from that shelter, it's kind of an extension of the program. So if you weren't able to, which most people probably won't by the time they're 18, get an apartment, especially in Los Angeles, right? If you weren't able to do all of that, then you get moved over to the program at Covenant House, and they continue on with that program and try to help you as an adult to save enough money to get an apartment and to develop some of those skills that you need to be able to carry on from there and change your story. So those are the kind of shelters. And the reason I'm excited that you mentioned that is because people walk by homeless youth on the street and they say, why don't you just get a job? You're old enough, you could just get a job. But they don't understand the barriers that are there, the systemic barriers, but as well as like the mental health issues, right? Like we've been abandoned by everybody. We don't trust anyone, and we don't believe in ourselves because we've been broken down. So we have that internal monologue getting in our way. And so those shelters really help with kind of building that as well for that age group. These shelters are, so you live in the shelter full time. So the shelter is my parent. When I first got dropped off, my mom actually retained custody of me. And so I did go, and I talk a little bit about that in the book, but I did go a long time without actually being in school. And so that's what affected with me not being able to get my diploma, because I was living in Hollywood. My mom was several hours away and she wasn't willing to sign over custody. And so I had to wait until I got a social worker to get someone to enroll me in school. The school wouldn't let me in without a parent enrolling me or a guardian, and I didn't have one. And so that's when I finally got into that transitional living, those emergency shelters that I was staying at, they didn't have that type of resource available. So it wasn't until I got accepted into that long-term transitional living home that I was assigned a social worker. And the social worker was able to get me enrolled in high school. And so the requirement really is that you go to school during the day. And if you're going to school, then you don't have to work or do the community service for the under 18 age programs. If you're not going to school, which some people don't, they just drop out of school, then you're required to do community service or have a job and provide the shelter with a portion of your paycheck so that they can save that money for you and help you to put that money down on an apartment. So I lived in it full time in and out of those shelters, but it was chaotic. Because I didn't have a stable home. I was in a shelter, and the people that were in the shelter, I mean, you had all types of demographics of people, and people that were runaways, people that had been exiled from their homes because of their sexuality, people who just didn't have parents. Their parents, they were orphans and they aged out of the foster care program. So there's a lot of different reasons why people would be in those shelters, and but you get to know people and you get to know people's stories, and you really build empathy when you live in shelters like that.
Yeah, I can only imagine how that would kind of change, your view of the world. You're seeing a bunch of children who are let down one way or another, and yeah, they need help. They need help like learning life skills. There's no mentor. There's no one showing love and teaching them things and buying them things. And so there's a lot of like that connection and those lessons that, they don't get to have. And so let's talk about your mom dropping you off there. That's pretty, intense thing to do to a child, pretty traumatic. So something, happens to you, and that leads to her just dropping you off there. Like, did you ever like see her again? And, what kind of led to that point?
So she was very young. She was a very young mom. And she kind of went through something similar in her teen years. And so I think she never dealt with the trauma that she experienced as a child. And I think in turn, she kind of put that back on me. Like she saw me as her younger self. So I would say I endured a lot of abuse, and you'll read about that in the book. And it's very hard. A lot of people who read about it, they're texting me and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm crying as I'm reading this because I can't believe that a child has gone through this. But I endured a lot of physical and emotional abuse as a child. And so by the time I got to my teen years, I started kind of speaking out against it. Like, this isn't right. This isn't how we should be treated. And so I would say from the age 14 to 16, I was kind of being shifted around, and she was trying to find, well, there were people who were trying to help me in our family or friends group that were, I was going from house to house. And then she just didn't deal with the trauma herself. And so I think this event happened and she was just done, and she wanted to relinquish her responsibility and not have me in the home anymore. And she, that story, you could tell I'm trembling as I'm talking about it, because as I wrote the book, I've been through a lot of trauma in my life, but I think the hardest story for me to tell and relive was the story of the night that I was dropped off at the shelter. And I was just sitting here bawling my eyes out as I was writing that story, because just that feeling of being abandoned in a dangerous place in the middle of the night, and just watching my mom drive away with my two sisters in the car. I can't explain it. I'll never understand why or how she did it. It was very, very hard for me. And I suppressed the feelings of it. And so when I had to relive it for the book, I had to relive the memories, right? The smell, the sound, all of that. And I had to put myself back in that situation. I almost felt like that child again. What I will say though is I did reconnect with her, and I have tried over the years. I'm not currently talking to her, but I have tried over the years to reconnect with her, but she still hasn't dealt with that trauma. And so I think a combination now of her trauma and mine makes it almost impossible for us to have a relationship. So in order for me to break the chains of dysfunction for my children, I had to just completely cut off ties, so that I wouldn't keep being brought back to that place and that pain.
Yeah, wow. That is intense. Because yeah, like I remember being a kid and having like nightmares that like my parents were, gone or whatever. They're kind of like your whole world when you're a kid.
Yeah.
And your worst nightmare would be losing them.
Mm-hmm.
So for you
Yeah, even
to,
with the abuse, like I thought that I had a normal family still. Like, even though I was being abused, to me that was normal. That was my family. That was my mom.
right. And you probably, when you joined the Navy too, I had an interesting childhood as well, and that I thought was also normal. And then when you join the military and you meet all these different people, you start telling your story, and then everyone's like, "What? Like what? That's not what happened to you?" You know what I mean? I'm sure you had a lot of those moments when you first joined.
Yes.
Um, but no, I think that's absolutely brutal for what happened to you. And there was no going back after that. It sounds like she didn't come back.
I tried, and I talk about that in the book too. There was, I tried because I thought maybe she made a mistake. Even along the way, I kept thinking like maybe she's going to change her mind, or maybe she made a mistake. She doesn't realize that this is just a drop-in shelter. It's not an actual group home. All the times that I had been shifted around from about 14 to 16, I always ended up back home. So that day when I left thinking I was going to eventually come back. I was driving by my school thinking I'll be back, and everybody's going to welcome me back, and they're going to wonder where I was, and I'm going to have stories to tell. But it just never happened. And there were times where I needed to go back. There were times where I literally had nowhere to sleep. I was walking on the streets by myself. Like it's hard because like I'm trying not to get emotional, but like literally walking on the streets in the middle of the night, trying to stay safe and trying to not be assaulted. And I'm this little like 100-pound girl trying to survive, and she just wouldn't come back and get me. And so yeah, it was tough.
Wow.
it's weird because as a kid, I thought maybe something was wrong with me. Maybe I deserved it. But as a mother now, I'm like, no kid deserves that. No
Yeah.
kid deserves
When you have your own children, you kind of relive the trauma, um, because you start thinking about your own kids, and you kind of wonder what it would be like to drop them off. You picture it in your mind,
that.
you think about it. How would that feel? So that you can
Yeah.
kind of understand more about what your own mother felt. And then when you can't even fathom doing that, it kind of makes it worse. You know what I mean?
Yes. Hmm.
It makes
It
it
hurts
worse for
more.
you.
Yeah. And my oldest daughter is the same age as I was. And so I think like I look at myself in the mirror and I see my mom's face. And, I'm that age. And my daughter is that age that I was. And I just think right now in this situation, could I ever imagine doing that to her? And there's no way. There's no way. And I'm extremely protective of my kids. I will say that I know when I tell my story, it's going to evoke emotion in people. And typically when people get emotional and they hear a story like that, they want to take action. And unfortunately on social media, people want to seek that person out and just go after them. And so if I can just say that if for anybody who does feel emotional, because I feel emotional telling it, so anybody who does feel moved, I just ask that if you feel emotion, you use that to go and help people and to go out and really help the people that are suffering and need help instead of going out and trying to seek revenge, because I don't want revenge.
Right. Yeah, wanting revenge that's kind of not letting go. Not, they always talk about forgiveness and really that's how you move on with your life. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so I'm proud of you, Janae. I'm proud of you
Thank you.
for, 99.99% of anyone that was in your shoes would not be where you're at today.
Mm-hmm.
99.99 would be struggling still to this day because of that trauma that, just like your mom, she couldn't let go of it. It kind of haunted her and stuck with her whole life, probably to this day. And
Yeah.
and it ruined her life. But you've turned your life around. And it does break my heart, like putting myself in your shoes and thinking about being abandoned as a kid, and seeing signs of human trafficking, and being in this homeless shelter and thinking that, oh, this will be over in a few months. I'll go back home. This isn't permanent. And then come to find out it is permanent. And your TikToks, you talk a lot about that. Like on one of them, you said, "Be your own hero, be intentional."
Mm-hmm.
You talk about like realizing no one's showing up for you, and that's when you need to be your own hero. A lot of that makes sense to me now that I know more about you and what happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that it lends all the way back to exactly that. And I grew up over the years, when this happened, a lot of people will ask, and my husband even asked when I tell the story, because he comes from a very loving family. And so when I tell him the story, he's like, so why didn't anybody else help you? And over the years, I really felt let down by a lot of the people in my life. And I thought, why didn't they? Like, why didn't anyone come and just pick me up and help me? Um, but I think there's people are dealing with their own things, and they've got their own stuff going on in their life, and there's other factors that you may not know about. Like, it's not legal to just go pick up a teenage kid and bring them to your home. You can't just legally go do that. And so I think there was that got in the way. There was the ability to communicate with me, because this was before social media, before cell phones. We had pagers back then, and I didn't have one. So we had pagers back then. So uh, at that time, I felt very like abandoned, and I felt very alone. And I realized at that time nobody was going to come and pick me up and pull me out of this situation. I'm going to have to do this on my own. And when I say be your own hero, because nobody's coming to save you, I don't mean for people to not try to save people and not try to help people. What I mean is, don't wait, and don't let the disappointment of people not coming in and saving you stop you from achieving greatness, because you still can, as long as you're intentional, as long as you stay intentional in your decision making and continue to think about what you want for yourself as you're making even the smallest decisions. You can and you will pull yourself out of even some of the greatest hardships.
Wow. Absolutely incredible, Janae. Thank you so much for giving us that insight. Okay, so we know a lot about your childhood and how brutal that was. And I'm so glad you joined the military because you're right. Like you were, excuse me, you were at a huge disadvantage. Like I could imagine it being really hard to get a job and hard to save money. It's almost like it's impossible when you're in that spot. And the military is a way to kind of turn that ship around. And so I just want to hear about like, we know why you joined. You had a really good burger that day.
Like, ooh, I could do this all the time.
But something tells me you didn't quite know what you were getting yourself into, right? So I want to just hear about your Navy experience.
I was very naive when I joined the Navy. I mean, as you can probably assume, I wasn't associated with the military as a kid, and I had no idea it sounds stupid, but I really didn't know what the military did. Like, I didn't play video games or watch TV, so I had no idea. And so when he offered for me to join, of course, the recruiter said things like, you're always going to be by the beach, which was true for the most part. There's bowling alleys on the, there's bowling
alleys. You're always going to be
ship.
by the beach. Oh my God.
Yeah. I mean, recruiters always have good things to say. So there's bowling alleys on the ship, which I never found the bowling alley. I checked every deck. I couldn't find a bowling alley on the Stennis. But I really didn't understand what I was getting into. And I thought it was going to be like just a big cruise ship. We were going to travel the world and just,
you're just explorers. That's all it is. You're just exploring and creating maps. And yeah.
I fell right into that trap. When I got into boot camp, I think I didn't have as hard of a transition in boot camp as a lot of the other people did, because the structure that you have to have in order to live in these shelters is very similar to the structure in the military. Obviously the counselors are cold. They're not your parents. So they're not loving. So there's kind of a coldness there. You have to clean up after yourself. There's a strict routine that you have to have in order to be allowed to stay in the shelters, and that's why a lot of people don't stay in the shelters. So being in boot camp wasn't as scary for me as it was for others, and I was like, oh, they're just yelling at me, they're not hitting me, so I'm fine. I can handle this. Like, yelling didn't scare me. So the first year of being in the Navy, we were at peacetime, and I thought, we were a floating Hollywood. So on the Stennis, it was a floating Hollywood. We had the Pearl Harbor premiere. You remember the Pearl Harbor movie with Ben Affleck and Keith Beckinsale?
That was a banger.
Yeah, it was amazing. Well, they actually had the premiere to the movie on our flight deck. And so we got to meet all of the stars.
No.
It was really cool. It was a really cool experience.
Wow, that's amazing. I
was on MTV. I was one of they let us talk about, call out the music on MTV. Yeah, I got to meet all the stars of the show. And I thought, okay, I could do this. I could do this for the long haul. This is fun. It was exciting. It was literally a few months after that Pearl Harbor premiere is when 9/11 happened. Now, if you think about that, I had just watched the Pearl Harbor movie, and then 9/11 happens. And a month later, I'm being shipped off to war at 19 years old. With that thought of what happened in the Pearl Harbor movie, could this happen to my ship? And so 19 years old, I don't have a driver's license. I don't have a high school diploma yet. I slipped through boot camp without getting my GED, which I was supposed to do while I was there.
Oh my God.
I am an anomaly in that way, because I think I'm one of the very few people who was able to get to, I think, E5 without a high school diploma.
That's unbelievable. Like, you can't even be, a master sergeant at this point without a freaking associate's degree. So for you to get that far with no high school diploma or driver's license, what the?
My life is just like all these crazy things that happen. So I got in on a waiver. I was supposed to stay in boot camp for an extra week, but they brought me in undesignated. So when I got to boot camp, my instructors were like, they heard my story and they were empathetic, and they're like, let's get you into an A school, which is for a rate, to get me a rate. MOS is what you guys call it in the other services. So when they did that, everybody forgot that I was supposed to do the GED program. And so I just kind of slipped right through.
And you weren't about to remind them.
I was not.
You were like, maybe I can go my whole life doing this. Yeah.
I was like, do I stay an extra week in boot camp, or do I just go on? And I did. I actually, when I was on the ship, the reason I found out I didn't have a GED, I forgot, right? So the reason we all found out was because I tried to sign up for college course.
No, you did not.
So
You're trying to sign up for college classes. What was the reaction when they realized you didn't have a high school diploma?
I got in trouble. They were like, "How did you make it this far?"
I would have hired you in like the CIA or something. Like, is she a spy? If she's not, she needs to be one. We need to hire her as a spy.
They were like, "How did you make it here?" Like, they put me with a career counselor, and they were like, "This wasn't supposed to happen." And so I was not allowed to return back home without taking that test. And so, look, you got me cry laughing over here.
They're like giving you like a little math quiz, and they're like,
yeah,
"You are not leaving this room until you do all your times tables. I don't care how long it takes."
Oh man, it was so, like, they were in complete shock when we all figured this out. And they were, I think, even more shocked that I had the audacity to try to sign up for college without even a high school diploma.
I mean, that's nuts. Yeah.
So I guess, like, my risk taking didn't start at the flight deck. It started even further back.
Janae, that needs to be on your merch. Risk taking is my superpower.
I'm writing that down as we speak.
Put that on your merch.
Yeah. So while we're, there off the coast and we're conducting air operations, I'm down on the mess decks in the chow hall taking an 8-hour test to get my GED. After that, I progressed pretty well. I got, all my warfare qualifications. I got several awards. Went on to be an instructor and a mentor in Great Lakes, where the boot camp is. And then that's where I met my husband and decided that it was best for me and my family to go ahead and transition out of the Navy. So it was very interesting. I did 2 full deployments, and I enjoyed my experience in the Navy. It was a good time.
You know what? I just decided that I don't have my bachelor's yet, but I'm going to enroll in a master's program. Yeah. I think I can do it. No, but
or you could just say, I'm an E5, but I'm just going to go ahead and take the E9. I'm going to go up for the E9 board.
I am. Yeah. I'm going to wear the rank too and go to jail afterwards. So that's where you met your husband. Is your husband, did he serve?
My husband did not serve. No, I met him. He's a Brazilian native, and he was just here on a visitor's visa. And we met when I was in Chicago, in Great Lakes, and we fell in love, and we ended up getting married and applying for his citizenship. So he was a Navy spouse for a few years.
Nice. So he came here just touring the place, and you're like, "Hey,
yeah,
you want to stick around
here? Stuck with me."
What do you think of the area?
What do you think of the area? It was funny because his English wasn't that good, and so I was like, I don't know if we're gonna cut it. But over time, we were able to communicate, and I think that the cultural differences really lended to things staying interesting between us, and us just having a good time and having fun getting to know each other and learning each other's cultures. So, but yeah, he was planning to go back to Brazil, and his whole family's still in Brazil, so he's a first-generation immigrant here in the United States.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, Brazil's an amazing country. Did you guys ever get to go back and check the place out?
Oh yeah, we try to go back every couple years. That's the reason we actually wanted to come to San Antonio. When we were living in Hawaii, it was like a 30-hour flight, a trip.
Wow.
To go to Brazil. And we were like, this isn't going to work. So typically we try to go every other year. We'll go to Brazil and visit them, and then his family will come to see us. So my in-laws will be here in a couple months, staying with us for a long time.
Oh, awesome. Are you close with his side of the family?
His side, yeah, we're pretty close to them. They are a godsend. They're amazing, and they're very loving to the kids. I've obviously had challenges with immersing myself into this loving family. And I talk a little bit about in the book about how, remember I was telling you that to me, my family was normal. And because my mom didn't know anything different from what she grew up with, we kind of grow up thinking that these loving, amazing families are fake, like they're not authentic, right? And so I had trust issues in the beginning with really believing, like, do they really love me? And it took me a while to kind of accept and allow them to actually love me. But I love them, and they're really great to my children, and so I'm very grateful for them.
So your upbringing, with a nice, loving family, you guys literally thought that was too good to be true, that it wasn't real.
It wasn't real. There's no such thing. They're faking. Yeah, that was kind of what we believed. And I don't think my mom was lying to us when she portrayed that to us, because I think that's what she believed as well, because that's all she knew.
Wow, that's sad. I mean, if that's truly what your belief system is, if that's all you've ever known, like how would you could
How do you break
never,
that?
yeah, you could never love yourself. You could never find happiness. You'd just be, in pain your whole life.
Yeah. And you know what, Josh, that's the reason that I think that it's important that this book gets out to a lot of people, because you only know within the realm of possible for you. And so a lot of people don't think that it's possible to break the chains of dysfunction, because all they know is that type of family lifestyle. And so to them, there's no way I'm going to break this. This is what I grew up with. And this is what my kids have to grow up with. And so they don't see that breaking those chains is within the realm of possible for them. And so I'm trying to really show that to people, that it takes it. You have to be intentional about that. That is something that if you want to break the chains of dysfunction and trauma, you have to be very intentional and be willing to accept fault in situations and say, you know what, I overreacted because that was what I knew, but that's not the right way. That's not how I should be acting. And so for me, I'm very intentional in parenting and being a wife, to try to break the chains of what I knew, and give my daughters the loving family that I didn't have, so that they're not having to question their selves as they get older and questioning what a loving family is.
Definitely,
And
yeah.
that's why I'm not angry at my mom. There were moments as I was writing the book that I got angry. I was like, how could you do this to me? It's like that TikTok, right? Like, how could you do this to me? Question mark. As I was writing the book, I kept thinking that, like, how can this be possible? But coming from an empathetic place, I think, well, she didn't have the resources. This was back in the 80s. She didn't have the resources. Nobody talked about mental health. Nobody talked about childhood trauma or family dysfunction. That was not a conversation that people were having. And so she didn't have those resources to break those chains either. And she wasn't willing to make that effort for herself. And so it would be unreasonable to expect that she would have made it for me.
Yeah, it's that generational trauma, of and it how many like families are impacted by that, where that happens to your mom, and then your mom treats you that way, and at a certain point it's like you can, when you're the one to realize it, yeah, it's on you to not pass that to your own children, because you've seen the difference. And so that's kind of one of the last questions I want to ask you is, you talk about like breaking the chains of what you thought was possible, and your take on the generational trauma and how you're not trying to pass that on. Like, how did you get to that point where you broke your own chains? Was there a certain moment where you knew that you could do anything you put your mind to?
I feel like I might have been born a little bit with that mindset, and I thought my experiences had molded that in me. But as I was talking to people who knew me as a very young child, they all said the same thing. Like, you were a very positive person. You always you were very intelligent. You were neat and tidy. They tell me that the same person I am, and you'll read it even in the foreword, that my best friend wrote, is that Janae is exactly the same person today that she was at 12 years old. Very creative, very, just outgoing and risk-taking. So I think I might have been born with it. But because I was put into a situation where I had to use those tools at a very young age, it was almost like I'm a type A. I was not going to give up. I was not going to allow my world to come crashing down around me. Does that mean that I didn't cry and I didn't suffer and I didn't have setbacks? No, I did. I had a lot. And there were times where I went through really depressed, episodes, and I went through, having to I would drink to try to, cope with the situations. But I think the main contributor to me wanting to truly break the chains of trauma and truly be a different person was when my oldest daughter was born. And that's when I said, okay, I have to be this is it for me. Like, I have to do everything that I do revolves around giving my daughters the life that I never had. Everything. And that includes creating a better world for them. And that's why I was willing to write this book, because I was really nervous to write it. And my book coach was like, no, you need to get your story out there. But that was one of the reasons I wrote it, is because creating a better situation for my daughters also means helping create a better world around them so that they can thrive in that world. And so if I can have an impact on more people in the world, then I'm also creating a better world for my daughters as well.
Definitely. You're coming from a place of love for your kiddos.
Because I didn't love myself for so many years. And I did have that internal monologue, just constantly beating myself down, pointing out all of my negative traits. And it wasn't until my daughter was born that I loved her so much that I realized that in order for me to really break those chains, just like you said, I had to learn how to also love myself. Because if they see me not loving myself, how can I tell them to love themselves? How can I tell them that they have so much potential in the world? And so that didn't come until many years after my daughter was born, that I finally decided to start working on my own, self-confidence, and really break free of all of the imposter feeling, the imposter syndrome, and feeling like people don't want to hear what you have to say, and, just constantly beating myself up. It took a long time for me to finally start working on myself. And this book was a part of that, because I had to live through the emotions as I wrote it. I had to bring those emotions back up that I had suppressed over the years, and actually work through those emotions in order to be able to empathize and write a true story about how I pulled through those situations. So it's a really good point that sometimes it takes for our kids to come into our lives, for our love is so great for them that we realize we have to love ourselves also.
Right. Yeah. That's incredible, Janae. Yes. Wow. I can't wait to read this book. My God. I check the mail every day.
I'm so excited.
I check the mail every day. And now I'm going to be gone for a week on this TDY. Now I'm definitely not going to see it for a week. Dang it. But
I should just go deliver it to where you're going to be. I think it's nearby. I'll have to look it up and see how far it is.
Attach it to a drone.
Yeah,
just attach it to a drone and just fly it on into the base.
They're gonna be like, what is this? You're gonna be like, that's that crazy risk taker superpower. Like, there she goes again. Like,
she's taking risks. There she is. That's my friend, y'all.
I'm gonna be flying over, like, drop the book.
Okay, so first question on exiting here is, if you were an 18-year-old today, what would your personality be on social media? What do you think that would look like?
If I was an 18-year-old today, my personality on social media, it would probably be very similar to what it is today, but without the knowledge and the education. So I'd probably just be a little bit more chaotic and opinionated. And, honestly, if it was my actual 18-year-old self, I'd probably be a little bit angry. I was thinking that the situation that I was in, of not having social media and not having smartphones, it hindered me, I thought. But she made a good point that it might have actually helped me, because if I had social media, I would have seen, like I told you, I would have seen what normal families look like, or what other people's lives look like. And I might have become bitter. I might have gotten, why isn't that me? Why don't I have that? And it might have actually lended to the lack of self-confidence that I had at the time. So I don't know, I might have been a little bit sarcastic and bitter at that time.
Yeah, I didn't even consider that, like comparing yourself to other kids. Yeah, that would be, that's happening today. That's literally happening right now. There's probably kids trying to find that place to sleep, checking their phone and seeing, all these other happy children that they used to know in high school. So that's literally happening right now.
It is, yeah. I know kids who are actually in that situation right now, and they're kind of my motivation behind the book.
That's beautiful. And I saw that there's a way to donate books to those shelters too, to give them hope. And I
Yes.
love that too. I love that message.
Thank you.
Okay. So next question. Let's say we know there's a girl out there who was abandoned just like you. They exist. They're out there. We know they're there. Um, except, you had that like spirit to like keep going. Not everyone has that, as you know. Most people don't. Most people, when something that traumatic would happen to them, they would resort to drugs, alcohol, and really never get out of that. So if you were to tell a girl that's in your shoes right now, the first step to getting out of that situation or changing her mindset, that first step, what would you recommend?
I think the first step I would say is to become a dreamer. Start daydreaming what you want, manifesting, right? As a kid, start daydreaming what you want for your life. And then keep in mind that decisions matter. Even the smallest decisions that you make, something that seems very small, really matters. And the reason I say that is getting caught up in drug addiction and trafficking. It doesn't happen the way that people think it happens. You're not just ripped off the street and thrust into it. You're given little opportunities that seem harmless, or that seem like they might pull you out of that situation just for a little bit of time. And those eventually lead to you being in a cycle that you can't get out of. And so when I first got to the homeless shelter, one of the very first people I met was a girl who was addicted, very heavily addicted to heroin. Her body was, completely degraded. She had craters. It was really bad how badly her body had been degraded. She was my age. She was addicted to heroin, and she was caught up in the sex trafficking trade. And in order for her to cope with being a prostitute, she did drugs. In order for her to get drugs, she had to be a prostitute. And so she couldn't break the cycle. And it started with a gateway drug. It started with, just doing something small for fun. And that's how they were able to trap her and keep her in that system. And so really, if I could give advice to the young girl who's in that situation right now, it's two things: daydream and believe that you can achieve whatever it is that you want to achieve, and then keep your decisions in line with what you're daydreaming about and what you're hoping for. And if there's decisions that are coming up that you need to make that don't lend to that, then veer away from those choices.
No, that's great advice. And yeah, I've seen a few of your videos too, talking about the covert methods
Yes.
of the trafficking.
It's not what people think.
Like what disturbed me the most on one of your videos was a someone who was basically trying to groom you in a way,
Mm-hmm.
like taking his time at getting your trust first
Mm-hmm.
by not making any advances on you, by actually trying to look out for you, you know, doing those things to get your trust, only to then try to rope you into trafficking. That just blew my mind when I
Yeah.
saw that video.
Yeah, and I talk a lot about I go really in deep on that situation, as well as another instance where it was a mule who was put into the homeless shelter. I don't know if she was put there or she was living there, but who also befriended me and was like, you can pull yourself out of this situation. I think it happens, and I want to add that it doesn't just happen to homeless kids. It happens to kids who are at risk even in their own homes. Um, Especially on social media. So kids who don't have good relationships with their families, or who are in a single parent home, where somebody online is able to get in and start manipulating that kid. And all of a sudden you start to see changes in your child, where your child used to get good grades, they used to be well behaved, and all of a sudden they're starting to have problems in school, they're starting to be disrespectful at home. So when that child runs away, the parent thinks, my child just changed and ran away. But really what happened was they were being groomed by someone online, and that person was saying, don't listen to your parents, they don't know what they're talking about, I'll protect you, I'll take care of you, I'll give you a better life. And a kid who seemed to be doing fine at home disappears, and nobody really goes looking for them in the way that a loving family might go look for their child who just was ripped from their hands, if that makes sense. And so but these the people who are out there trying to find at-risk kids, that's where they place themselves. They place themselves near these homeless shelters. The guy that we were talking about, he was at a security guard at a free clinic. And so, of course, there's like a lot of homeless youth and at-risk youth going to this free clinic to get services, to take showers, to get supplies. And he's a security guard there so that he can watch and he can monitor and kind of see your routine. And that's how he was able to kind of weasel his way in. So yeah, it's really dangerous.
That's disturbing. Actually, that's just pure evil.
It really is. And I didn't know that was what was happening at the time. I knew it didn't feel right. I knew that what I was being asked to do wasn't in line with what I wanted for myself in the future. And so I said no. But it wasn't until I got older that I realized that I was actually, these were sex trafficking attempts.
Right. And the mule thing, that's disturbing too. And I learned a lot about that from the Jeffrey Epstein case, because that was his like method. You know, he would pay them to be mules. You know, what a disturbing, like, gosh, I just can't even believe that world exists. You know what I mean? That it's still there. It's happening, you know, right now at this moment, that there's people who that's on their mind all day long. That's just disturbing.
Yeah.
Okay. Last question. We talked about generational trauma. Obviously, you had the generational trauma passed to you. The burden was on your shoulders, and you could either embrace it and spit that out to the world, and that's how you see the world, just like your mother did, or you could do the opposite. And so my question is, what piece of the generational trauma stuck around the most, was the hardest to acknowledge, the hardest to, you know, strip away so that you weren't spewing that out to the world and to your children and to your family?
Yeah. The hardest is the it's a lot. There's a lot, but I would say the hardest is the emotional, the just kind of getting angry or reacting really quickly without taking into consideration how it's going to affect the people around me. And drinking kind of lends to that. So, you know, if I'm drinking and somebody says something, I get mad and I don't want to listen. And I don't want to, I've worked through it, but I wouldn't want to listen. I wouldn't want to hear what they had to say. Like I was right. And that was it. And everybody around me had to be quiet. And so now what I have to do is I have to really remove myself from the situation. If I start to feel upset or I start to feel like I'm not being valued or respected in a situation, I have to kind of pull myself away from the situation and like just take a moment to really process my thoughts. And I think I definitely, my oldest daughter has watched me heal through that. So I can't say that I have not passed any of it on to them. I think they have seen me, with outbursts or reacting, but they're not getting like the physical. And they've also watched me as I recognize that I made a mistake or I recognize that I overreacted. And then I come back and I apologize to them. And I explain to them that, you know what, I shouldn't have reacted that way. You didn't do anything to deserve that. And I'm really sorry for getting so upset with you. And so I think that would be the one that has been the hardest for me to break.
Yeah, definitely.
Physical abuse, I can't hurt people. So that one, it's not hard, but the emotional stuff, yeah.
Right. Like just going 0 to 100, being triggered and kind of losing control for a minute of like your emotions and what comes out your mouth. You know what I mean? I know how that feels.
It's a little bit of a fight or flight too, like I remember when I was in the Navy, I used to get, there was like this, I don't know, somebody I didn't get along with when I was in the Navy once. And he said, I had like, the way he said it, it was like, it caught me off guard because when he would say things that upset me, because he was kind of getting under my skin, I guess I had kind of that survival mode of how I spoke back to him. And it was really like firm and kind of angry. And he said that I had an evilistic tone. And I was like, an evilistic tone, like, oh my gosh, like that's really deep. And so I had to start like thinking about like what was coming out of me. Like, was that even me? Was that even true to who I was, the way that I was reacting? And I'm not a mean person. It's just that I was defending myself and I was maybe going a little higher in my tone than I needed to in order to get my point across, because I had never protected myself as a kid.
Yeah, he probably, whoever that was, probably just saw your reaction as like way more than he expected.
Hmm.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And so he probably instinctively knew that you weren't just mad at him, you were mad at something else. You know what I mean?
Yes. Hmm.
And they say people with trauma from their childhood, especially with like abandonment, are more sensitive to things like that, you know, to attacks. They're
Hmm.
more sensitive to love, and they're also more sensitive to, you know, snapping on someone if they cross the line, because we're, you know, you're trying to protect yourself. You're kind of fighting for your life to
Yeah.
protect yourself. So Janae, thank you for sharing that. You know, as we come to a close here, great, we had a phenomenal talk. You're an incredible person.
Thank you. Thank you. So
For
are you.
real. I appreciate that. Um, you know, as we come to a close, though, I just wanted to know if there's anything that you wanted to share, you know, with the Hero Front family or anyone out there listening.
I just want to, again, I don't know if you saw on social media, you said you are following along. So we did hit bestseller. Yesterday was our launch day. We hit bestseller. So for those that are listening, if you can just go in there and grab a book at perfectlyflawedbook.com. You can find me at Janae Perfectly Flawed across all of our social media. And just to leave you with, you know, again, be your own hero. Don't wait for someone to come in and save you. Be intentional with the path that your life takes, and let massive success be your revenge. Don't seek revenge on people, but just work towards success, and you won't even need to worry about those people anymore that have hurt you. So, and again, thank you so much for your time. I love the veteran community and being so closely involved with it. So I always appreciate being on these podcasts with you guys. Thank you.
Definitely. So, Janae, uh, Perfectly Flawed, a veteran's journey from homeless to hero. We got to hear all about you being 16 and homeless, the human trafficking close calls that you had, the delicious burger that talked you into joining the Navy. Um, and just so many lessons about being intentional, showing up for yourself, all the funny things you do on TikTok. Your sense of humor is like the same as mine. You're on Drew Barrymore's show. Your husband's adorable. You're I think you're a fashion designer.
I am a fashion entrepreneur.
Okay, you seem to have your own clothes. Those seem like all your thing, and they look incredible.
Thank
Um,
you.
you're a veteran. I mean, just it's just unbelievable. Like the story, you know, we just got a piece of the story, like barely scratching the surface, and I'm just completely blown away that you even exist. I mean, you went from that poor homeless girl wandering the streets, not sure what is going to happen to you. You know, you're fearing for your safety, you're fearing for your life. And to go from that to, you know, Janae now, author, mother, spouse, to this really cool Brazilian guy. I mean, you're just killing it.
Thank
You're
you.
just killing it. And I'm so proud of you. I'm so blessed to know you. Thank you so much for spending time with me tonight. We had an amazing conversation. You were super vulnerable, and you dropped a lot of wisdom and insight that I know is going to change people's lives. So thank you so much, Janae.
Thank you too. Appreciate it.
What's up, Hero Front fam? Josh here. And I just wanted to thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening to that episode in its entirety. I owe you a hug. And the next time I see you, let me know how many hugs I owe you, and we'll get after it. Before you turn me off, though, I want you to subscribe on YouTube to the Hero Front Podcast and give me a 5-star rating on Facebook or Apple Podcasts. It would be much, much appreciated to get your love and support. Again, thank you from the bottom of my heart for joining us on this Hero Front journey, and I will see you on the next episode. Let's get after it.